I suspect every developer seeking to convert an old discarded church has a story of woe to tell. Buying any ancient building to convert into new use is fraught with danger. Expect your peace of mind to ride a roller coaster of emotion, anxiety, depression, and even regret. Watch your budget evaporate far quicker than you ever expected. Even before you progress to that first installation, that piece of finished work, that fitting that announces this is no longer a church, it will be a home. See your original estimates wither under the weight of unforeseen work. Delays, interruptions, labour shortages, and spiralling material costs. Be prepared to discover the architect's proposal is unworkable, and find the planning authorities interfere with every change and every decision. More cost, more compromise, more frustration. Endless hoops to jump through and hurdles to clear, while money falls from your pocket to feed an overpriced heritage industry gorging on opportunity. Your dreams will be tested in the real world of property conversion and building conservation. Your bank account will certainly diminish under the weight of it all. And your savings will quickly evaporate with every invoice. And even your relationships will grow strained as you descend into that never-ending credit trap, which will haunt you long after the work is done. There will be as many horror stories as there are happy endings. With beautiful new homes and businesses built within old discarded churches and chapels, ensuring a surfeit of old, spiritually diminished architectural souls are reborn into the new. However, in amongst old stone sold off at bargain prices, there is rarely economic success. That is the price of owning heritage. It is a commitment of the heart, not the head. But what you do not expect is to find Knights Templar treasure in the church belfry and under its floors. That is a contingency no one would plan for. In the last two videos, I introduced you to Holywood Church here in southwest Scotland and its bells, and the beginning of our story, which is yet to find a conclusion. If you are joining our story for the first time with this video, at chapter 3, I'll give a link to the first chapter in the description below. It is a story which involves one of the most significant medieval discoveries not dug from the ground. No Viking gold, no Anglo-Saxon treasure, and no Kings of England lost under Leicestershire car parks. Instead, it is a story of an indisputable Knights Templar discovery. It's a story which sadly illustrates the shortcomings of the Scottish and UK heritage sector, influenced by decades of academic and bureaucratic mismanagement and prejudice. It's a story which you can profit from by contacting us directly and coming to the aid of the story's beleaguered protagonists, my wife and I. We need supporters, a core of noble sponsors, people who can influence a campaign to have this site here at Holywood recognised for what the evidence reveals, rather than what misguided, outmoded Victorian opinion, set as fact by the establishment, reports. We want to highlight that objective merit and fact overrides any conceited academic subjective opinion. Those who love history need to shout, enough is enough. Merit is where you find it, not where academia nor the establishment tells you where it is to be found. Assumption is a dangerous shortcut in decision making. Without a grasp of all the facts, we can make terrible mistakes. In 2019, my wife and I made a terrible mistake. We mistakenly trusted those who were commissioned to understand the facts. We mistakenly trusted the last developer of this old church to tell us the whole truth. We mistakenly trusted the previous owners of this church, including their paid professional agents, to understand the archaeology in the building and its constraints. Constraints that would prevent any meaningful rehabilitation of the building. Constraints that would involve millions of pounds to remedy. Constraints so severe, any competent building surveyor or conservation architect would shout, "Run away," in their client's ear, because it would cost a great deal of money to fix. A great deal of money indeed. My wife and I, of all people, should have known that there would be problems, because water services had not been installed to the church in 240 years, despite a water main no more than 50 metres from its doors. We should have grasped from a previous public campaign to remove the church bells that the local council and the Church of Scotland were less than diligent about safeguarding the site's history and heritage for the benefit of the local people. We should have heard the church bells chiming a loud warning, because there was an obvious disparity between the officially accepted bell's age and what was actually hanging in the belfry, indicating perhaps the understanding of the site of the church may equally be misjudged. Yet, with assumption that the history of the church had been in the hands of competent owners and recently investigated by competent professionals, we took the risk of buying and converting Holywood Church, and all was well as all could be. And to this day, my wife and I pray, why us? Why us? We had £50,000 and no opportunity to secure a mortgage. Buying the church was a desperate and rather urgent act to find a home we could both live with and live in. So we handed over all of our capital, and with plans to increase our monthly income to carry out the work and cashing in our pensions, we entered the arena of property conservation. It was not our first time, and thinking back, if it were not for the time constraints placed upon us and the extremely limited choice of property we could afford at the time, and being sick of renting bad properties from bad landlords, I think we would have walked away from Holywood Church. And in hindsight, even with the knowledge of the treasure we have found, if we had the choice again, we would have definitely walked away. My wife and I both admit something intangible drew us to the building and clouded our better judgment. Well, that's the excuse my wife and I are sticking to. But I'll lay our credentials on the table for you to judge our foolishness. My wife is trained in forensic archaeology, having 2 degrees in that discipline, and time teaching the subject. She knew how involved archaeological investigation and expensive it could be. And I was a seasoned building surveyor with a commendable career in construction and conservation management. From involvement in the restoration of Reading Abbey in the 80s, ending with a building consultancy in the 2000s, with a great many highlights and achievements in between. We both have worthy professional legends. Projects completed with excellent outcomes for our employers and our clients. Professional legends that dictated we should have never bought Holywood Church because we were not naive. But also legends that were ideal to discover what was hidden in the church. So what did we find? It was entry into the church on a cold winter morning that first alerted us to the humidity problem in the building. The warm air was so palpable, we looked for the fire in what was an unheated building in the middle of winter. The walls in the hallway ran with condensation. Great rivers of water ran down the walls, soaking the concrete floor below. Everything was wet or damp. Condensation was ruining everything that was stored in the church. As the months progressed, mould grew everywhere. Mould spores in the air in some areas were at 5 times harmful levels. My wife, a chronic asthmatic, was banned from entry. And any labour intensive work, regardless of the temperature outside, you would be sweating in minutes. It was only then we knew why the industrial dehumidifier was left by the last developer. Not to dry the property out after floods, which we had experienced in the early weeks of ownership, but to dry out the atmosphere in the church daily. We measured the humidity throughout the building over a year. An average 90% humidity was recorded throughout the building, never falling below 70%. The problem was decades old and impossible to ignore. The humidity problem pointed to deep-sited voids under the church, left over from the old Abbey complex. These voids could be made up of old cellars, basements, vaults, wells, or even degraded medieval drains. These voids contained water, and through the effects of ground heating, warm, humid air evaporated, penetrating the building above. Without excavation, we would not know the extent of the voids or the problem, or what the voids contained, or what work would be required to seal the voids to prevent them from filling with water. But with the extent of the problem and the palpable humidity, even in the large open church hall, it was clear the voids under the church were both deep and significant. There was already a cellar in the church, as confirmed by a sealed subterranean access on the outside of the building, complete with dressed stone below ground level, built over by a later boiler house. There were stories shared by locals who remembered being chastised by the church minister in the 1960s for lifting a floor hatch near the pulpit area to explore the dark cellar below. The basement was sealed off in the 60s and negligently overlooked by the previous developer's architect. But this was not the problem. The basement was small, not particularly deep, and as indicated by the subterranean boiler house, likely to be dry. Aggravating the problem of water collecting under the church, however, was the rain runoff from the church roof. It was not taken away by drains, but deposited directly into the ground around the perimeter of the church, resulting in large pools at several points against the church walls. That in periods of heavy rain became mini lakes enjoyed by the ducks. And although we alleviated the problem of the pooling, it did not diminish the amount of water directed into the voids under the church. There were signs of subsidence on the northern part of the building where the humidity problem was the most acute, and although the movement was decades old, any proposed internal excavation would have to be carried out with extreme caution. Without work to remedy the problem, we would have to depend on mechanical conditioning of the air in the church, which was expensive to install and run and not ideal. But still, even if we chose to ignore the problems below, we could not ignore the fact we'd have to break through the original floor to install services. And once archaeology was encountered, we would have to treat it appropriately. Thus, the cost of refurbishing the church became both incalculable and untenable, because the amount of archaeology was unknown, but we knew it would be significant. But there was more archaeology above these voids. There were 2 medieval wall plaques built into a fireplace in the nearby hearse house, unrecorded by any previous survey. Following an investigation, we discovered the fireplace was built in 1965. The 2 medieval wall plaques had been discovered by the heating engineer when he broke through areas of the floor around the pulpit area to install new heating pipes. The stones were discovered not directly below the timber floor, which was installed in the Victorian period, but beneath the original Georgian grey sandstone floor, installed in 1779. That original paving stone had been lifted by the Victorian builders and recycled elsewhere, but the limestone course beneath the stone was undisturbed. At that time, the heating engineer pulled out several stones, including a foliated cross, which was given to the local landowner, which has since been lost. The heating work in the 1960s was limited to the front of the church near the pulpit. The church pews were not lifted, and the vast majority of the timber floor, over 90%, remained undisturbed. The stone was the rescued decorative stone from the demolished 12th century built church. As less than 10% of the floor was disturbed in 1965, there was much more stone still interred under the original floor. This means any disturbance to the floor in any area to install services would involve a considerable archaeological exercise to lift the stones and treat them appropriately. So we had at least 2 layers of archaeology to deal with. Several archaeological agents provided us with different scenarios, all being in excess of £800,000 as a starting price. To complicate the matters more, it was clear the voids held artefact. Resident mole archaeologists, not content in bringing up human bones in the surrounding graveyard and fields, had brought up a find from within the church precinct. A piece of medieval gilded obsidian chalice. Broken gilded obsidian is not the kind of material you throw away, but recycle. So it was probable the chalice was, at one point in the past, whole beneath the ground. Treasure. It confirmed stories of weapons and bronze and stone artifacts being found in the voids under the cemetery by Victorian gravediggers. Stories that included a tunnel leading from the abbey site northeast across the fields uncovered by Victorian farmers. More archaeological treasure existed above ground too, in the belfry. The bells were indeed 12th century, as testified in the 18th century first statistical account of Scotland, and by the shape of the long-waisted bell. That in itself, however, is not treasure, although the bell's insurance value quadrupled from the original estimate to around £100,000 per bell. Our antiquities agent and insurance valuer recognised we had completely debunked the original Victorian 16th century understanding of the bell's age, but stated regardless of the compelling evidence we had uncovered, we needed third-party authentication to assign a value. Until then, insurance would be denied. However, the commercial value of bells, despite any age, would still be only in scrap metal. Church bells have no real value outside the historical and spiritual. They are not decorative. There is very little market, and collectors are few. But a Knights Templar provenance elevated the bells from all the other 65,000 bells currently hanging in belfries across the UK, and the hundreds of thousands of ancient Christian bells in the world. The bells were unique, not just as bells, but uniquely surviving provenanced Knights Templar artifact, objects with significant commercial and historical appeal. Our specialist auction and insurance agents declared them with authoritative authentication to be worth a fortune. And since these people dealt in very large fortunes as commonplace, their increased excitement indicated a fortune more than a fortune. The bells were not something we could put on display in the hearse house or live with hanging in the belfry, or even donate to the local museum. They were simply too valuable. If they were to remain in the church would have to become a purposed gallery to allow viewing, with high security and all. £6 million of investment into a museum with very little commercial return, measured against the bell's commercial value as marketable antiquities. By the summer of 2020, We had abandoned any plans of making a home out of Hollywood Church. The cost of refurbishing the building was at least 10 times the original estimate, with works taking probably years to complete. Hollywood Church and its bells had to find new appropriate keepers. Someone or an institution with the means to care for the bells appropriately, considering their value, and explore the archaeology beneath the church, renovating the church afterwards, appropriate to the site's history and discovery. All that was not in our remit. So all planned work outside essential maintenance was suspended. Security was prioritised. And the children were writing their Christmas lists in May. At the point of sale in 2019, when my wife and I bought Hollywood Church, we were not to know we were not investing our time, effort and earnings to make a home for our family, but starting a new journey, the kind of journey you read about or watch for entertainment. Watch as antique specialists, replete with bow tie and colourful waistcoat, tells an unsuspecting member of the public that old Regency chair they hauled from their granny's bungalow, strapped to their roof rack with a ponderous story of how it was acquired at the car boot sale for a fiver in 1995, was worth £100,000. The chair wasn't worth £100,000 because it was a chair, but because of its provenance, because it once graced the arse of Napoleon Bonaparte at the Battle of Waterloo, perhaps, when he felt a little faint at the prospect of having that same arse kicked by the Prussians come to the aid of the Duke of Wellington. Whereas many an entertaining documentary and reality TV show are broadcast after the real event, sprinkled with a little fiction and manufactured drama, my wife and I were right in the middle of it. No friendly experts in bow ties, no celebrity historians rappelling from helicopters to discover for the first time hidden template history. There was only fact of finding treasure left by the Templars, not in gold and silver, but in bronze. And then having what was obvious, not only overlooked by 120 years of a lack of historical inquiry, but as we will reveal, further discounted by a modern and unquestionable litany of avoidance. But this environment avoidance was not known to us in 2021 when we released the first version of our archaeological report, with a few items still to resolve, but nevertheless offering a robust conclusion. A conclusion dictating the bells were not what the traditional and academic record stated, and so required serious reconsideration, a view supported by the local museum. In 2021, my wife and I were as naive as the rest of the general public, those that exist outside the realm of the heritage sector and its academic historian overlords. We had no idea our discovery would not be welcomed or considered with earnest good intent by those who not only are commissioned to consider such things, but who are paid to do so. In 2021, after 18 months of dedicated scholarly research, the first ever carried out not only on the Hollywood bells, but the potential origins of the Templar caste in Scotland, our discovery would be eclipsed by a needless and illogical trial, as those that should have considered the find objectively and professionally deliberately avoided it. Not because our work had little merit, quite the reverse in fact, but because the discovery was an uncomfortable event for them. Of course, without robust evidence, our protestations and our story are hollow, theatre and not truth. Another spurious and speculative Knights Templar claim put before you in the name of entertainment and speculative history. Evidence is key. You need facts, not supposition. You have better things to do than listen to fanciful claims, delusional claims of found Templar artifact. I need to convince you with facts, evidence, and inarguable circumstance that anyone can comprehend without the need for academic or expert interpretation. And all the facts, evidence, and research is included in our fully illustrated and referenced archaeological report, available free to download from our website. And if you doubt me, I urge you to read it. If you take the time to interrogate our investigation, laid out in over 120,000 words and illustration, accompanied by our book available through the link on the website, you'll understand perhaps why academics and experts, who often trade on opinion rather than evidenced argument, are uncomfortable with a discovery by those they regard as amateurs. It is a question of quality, and the merit within our investigation challenges the credibility of the academic view. Interrogation of our research involves a commitment of time, and we understand that. So, to help in the next video, we present the analysis of the inscription on the bells, the elimination of possibilities, and the analysis of the sponsor's legend on medieval charter. A legend that dictates the sponsor of the bells of Holywood could only be a master within a religious military order, and through his father's legend dictates he was a 12th century Knights Templar. The link for that video is below in the description. My wife and I are standing at the gates of this ruined temple with treasure in our hands. But we need others to help us bring it safely to a new keeper. We've provided the evidence of the treasure's worth, its provenance. And there is no intelligent argument to reject it, nor supportable doubt the naysayers can muster to quash its inarguable conclusion. There is only a bloated, prejudiced establishment who should help, but prefers to stay clear of one of the most significant medieval finds made in this millennium, simply because they do not like the finders. The Scottish Government tries to lessen the bell's significance by declaring the bell's history not as important as the establishment's bureaucracy and its deficient and woefully outdated and ill-conceived record. The establishment hides its prejudice that we, mere public, are in its eyes the wrong people to uncover the truth of these Hollywood Templar bells, as if not sitting in the halls of academia renders those outside, the poorest of humans, floundering uneducated in the world, the real world beyond the sanctified walls of academic learning. Poor humans who apparently, according to academia, are incapable of thinking, logic, merit, intelligence, and from that, erudite research and deep dive investigation, all into subjects academia does not care to bother with, such as its truancy with regards to understanding the detail of history. It appears our state-sponsored heritage safekeepers wish to continue to corrupt Scotland's historical legend by trying to deny another medieval hero from entering Scotland's Hall of Fame, all to preserve the incompetence of a system that has been allowed existence without audit or any test of its worth. A heritage establishment which, through its elitist and prejudiced attitudes, serves the academic community more than the public. Now we need the cavalry to come riding in, individuals who put integrity and merit before compliance, perhaps a charge of metaphorical Templar Knights, a new people's crusade. We need to rebuff the establishment and see the treasure home safely, and for the cavalry to share in the spoils of victory over malevolence. As ever, please like and share this video. At the time of this video's release, my wife and I have no money to promote, no social media reach, no vociferous media or local community backing us up, And whereas we have advice, what we need is action and active support. People prepared to roll up their sleeves and help us safeguard this momentous discovery. Subscribe to our channel. Register for updates on our website. Read about our campaign on the website. Please sign our petition. Engage with us if you think you can help or want to help. And in the meantime, buy me a coffee in the link below. Or buy our book, given in the link on our website. It all helps us raise monies to keep the bell safe whilst we campaign and build our legal fund in defence of Scotland's history from the misbehaviour of the Scottish Government. See you next time.